A very good afternoon, everybody. Last Friday afternoon before our Christmas break for these Friday focused talks. My name is Stef Scholten. I'm director of the Hunterian, and it's my pleasure to introduce very briefly this talk to you. That will be about a new acquisition, A View of Glasgow Green by John Knox, a great painting that I remember that I particularly well because Mungo Campbell, the recently retired deputy director of the Hunterian, and myself were in London with Patrick Bourne, who had alerted us that he had this picture on sale on behalf of one of his clients, and we got very excited quite immediately. However, a big investment for the Hunterian, also because the Hunterian is not allowed to buy any artworks from our normal funds. So we always have to make sure we get, we use some of our endowment, and then we get support from different organizations, amongst them most prominently the Art Fund and the National Fund for Acquisitions. I see Hazel's here. Thank you for your support, or for the support of the NFA, to be able to acquire this. So Anne is going to talk about everything you always wanted to know about this particular painting in 25 minutes, more or less. Then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. You can drop questions in the chat that you may have that we can then go back to at the end. And with that, I just hand over to Hunterian curator Andy Lowe, one of the most knowledgeable people about Scottish arts in Scotland. So the right person for the job. And there you go.
Thank you, Steph. Well, a flattery always gets you anywhere, doesn't it? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I think I am now screen sharing. I hope you can see. Yes, that's wonderful. So good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, as always. And as Steph was saying, to share the Hunterian's excitement about a new addition to our collection, A View of Glasgow Green by John Knox. This painting, which was acquired from a private collection, arrived from London only a couple of months ago, and it was brought to us, as Steph pointed out, through the help of Patrick Bourne, and with financial support from the Art Fund and the National Fund for Acquisition. So, over the next 25 minutes, I will explore a few key points. Who was John Knox, and what makes him an artist of interest? What stories does the painting tell us, and why is it significant? And I will also discuss how the painting aligns with the Hunterian's collecting policy and the way it enhances our existing collections, as well as our future plans for showcasing it. So who was John Knox, and why is he interesting? Well, he's among a few Scottish artists who were active in the early 19th century, whose contribution to the development of Scottish art has been overshadowed by the passage of time. Why? Well, perhaps because many of his best works remain tucked away in private collections or have been misattributed over time. And maybe some of you will remember the buzz in the Scottish art world back in 2015. I need to change slide if I can. Why is that not happening? There we go. When a painting titled Glasgow Fair, which you can see on your screen, made headlines. This intricate scene, depicting locals celebrating on Glasgow Green in the 1820s, resurfaced at a London auction in 2013 after having last been seen at the vast Glasgow International Exhibition that was held at Kelvin Grove back in 1901. Initially, when the painting resurfaced, it was mistakenly attributed to Irish artist William Turner Dillon and described as a fair in Aberdeen. And it's Patrick Bourne who later identified it as a long-lost masterpiece by Knox, brimming with life. And we've got booths, sideshows, rides, and over 1,000 detailed pictures from soldiers and street vendors to beggars and the wealthy mingling together. It really is a remarkable painting. If you haven't seen it, you should go and see it. So thanks to the support from the heritage, sorry, I'll go back to the painting actually because it's not time to move yet. Thanks to support from the Heritage Lottery Fund and others, the painting was acquired by Glasgow Life, where you can see it today. So who was John Knox exactly? Well, he was born in Paisley in 1778, and he was the son of a yarn merchant. He moved to Glasgow as a young man, and he first made his name as a portrait painter and a drawing teacher. By the late 1800s, his flair for landscape painting was starting to emerge, initially through backdrops painted for the theatre. But in 1808, Knox decided to go big, literally, and he stepped into the world of panorama with his first large-scale depiction of Glasgow, a sweeping view of the city's north bank of the Clyde, as seen from the Gorbals, displayed in all its glory on an enormous canvas. It was a kind of artwork that didn't just sit on a wall, it immersed you. But here's a catch with panoramas. They were painted on such huge canvases that most didn't stand the test of time. Sadly, Knox's original view from the old Glasgow Bridge is one of those casualties. Thankfully, we've got a lifeline to the past, thanks to the paintings that you can see on your screen, which is a much reduced version of the panorama that Knox executed in 1817. Titled Old Glasgow Bridge, it gives us a glimpse into how Glasgow once looked, and it's also in Glasgow Museum's collections. And I will talk you through very briefly the different landmarks from the painting. So if you start at the top left corner here, you can see all the kind of cones from the Jamaica glasswork, which are hovering above what was known at the time as Jamaica Bridge, which is also known as Brumlow Bridge or Glasgow Bridge sometimes. And then if we go along the river, you can see more sort of industrial chimneys rising over Anderston. And then we get to St. Andrew's Roman Catholic Church, which was built in 1816. So it wouldn't have been on the original panorama, but it was added on this later version by John Knox. And then we've got grand Palladian houses of tobacco lords along here. And then we get at the end of the bridge, we get to a brand new tenement that really sticks out. It does look very fresh. It had just been finished in 1816 again. And then we move along here. You can recognize the merchant stipple here. And then we've got justiciary buildings along here. And then we get to Glasgow Green and we finish with the Nelson Monument that again had been erected only in the last few years before this was painted. And in the foreground, it's building with life, really. I mean, we've got people watering their animals here, and then we've got people sailing along the Clyde, and then we have diverse groups chatting in animated conversation. And quite a nice little detail is that white gate here, which was at the end of the bridge and adds historical charm, as the bridge itself was actually demolished in 1847. So Knox was among the first to capture Glasgow's evolving cityscape, and he also focused on its surrounding areas, from views atop Ben Lomond to the rugged charm of the Trossachs. And he mastered both grand panoramas and more intimate, smaller works that could grace any home. I couldn't help but sharing with you one of my very favorite painting by John Knox, which is in fact a pair, as you can see here. And it was a panorama that was made by Knox in around 1810, and it must have been really impressive when you were finding yourself immersed in that view from the top of Ben Lomond. It's depicting vistas from the north and southwestern side of the Ben Lomond, those two smaller versions are now on loan to the National Gallery of Scotland from a private collection. And even though they're not as impressive as the original panoramas, they're still rather awe-inspiring, I think. So the composition is centered on Ben Lomond's peak, with a shimmering loch stretching out into the distance and rolling hills framing the scene, evoking the untamed wildness of the Highlands. But it isn't all inaccessible wilderness. Tourism is part of the story. And in the foreground, if you look on the right of your screen here, you can see gillies or shepherds that are sharing a picnic, and the sheep that are gazing really perilously close to the edge of the rock here. And then on the next slide, I've got a detail of the top left corner of the painting that was previously on your screen, and it's from the southwestern view from Ben Lomond. And you can see on the far left here, a gentleman pointing out to the view, and his companion is seated with a sketchbook on her lap. So she's obviously busy making a sketch of that very view. And then by the shore of the lake, we can see two people on horseback that are obviously exploring the area. And we've got more figures here that are pointing their fingers at the view. So it's really rather busy for an isolated kind of Scottish pig. And they really capture the growing appeal of Ben Lomond as a destination for travelers and artists alike. And then within the smaller works that Knox executed, quite possibly inspired by the success of his panorama of that view from Ben Lomond, are a series of works that capture views in the Trossachs. And here we're looking at Ben, another iconic hill in the area. And the painting was acquired by the Hunterian back in 2022. Thanks again to help from grants from the National Fund for Acquisition and the Art Fund. And up until relatively recently in Knox time was actually really rather difficult to access. But in the late 18th century, it was made accessible by a road that was carved through the rocks near Loch Catherine. And by the time Knox painted this scene in the late 1810s or maybe early 1820s, the area's fame had skyrocketed thanks to Sir Walter Scott, 1810 blockbuster poem, The Lady of the Lake. And from that time on, tourists have flocked to the tourist, and Knox painting captures different aspects of the Trossachs beautifully. This depiction of the wooden bridge at the Trossachs wasn't a one-off. It's the only version that I know of that has survived, but we know through past exhibition catalogues that it was a recurring theme in his work throughout the 20s and 30s and 40s, and he exhibited several versions in between 1813 and 41. Paintings such as these cemented his reputation as one of Scotland's leading landscape painters. By the 1820s, his studio on Dunlop Street had become a hub for future artistic talent, mentoring notable pupils like Daniel McNee, Horatio McCulloch, and William Leighton Leach. Then in 1828, Knox moved to London, exhibiting at prestigious venues like the Royal Academy and the British Institute. He returned to Glasgow in 1836, and he eventually settled in Chiswick in 1840, where he died 5 years later. And he was rather well known during his lifetime, but then as time went past, his name got a little bit forgotten. And it's only in recent years, I think, that his significance as a key figure in Scotland's cultural history has started to gain renewed attention. Not only did Knox play a pivotal role in the rise of Scotland as a tourist destination, but he also contributed significantly to the development of the Scottish School of Landscape Painting. And for those of you who are interested in finding out more, Knox's contributions are highlighted in the Hunterian's Old Ways, New Roads, Travels in Scotland's publication and online exhibition, which took place back in 2019. We were supposed to have a physical exhibition as well, but unfortunately the pandemic made it impossible. So, I should say here, I suppose that the two resources highlight Knox's savviness as a Regency early Victorian artist who recognized the growing popularity of images of Scotland and strategically tapped into this trend. And they show how his works celebrated Glasgow and picturesque spots steeped in literary and historical associations, making them ideal subjects for prints used in travel guides and other publications tied to Scotland's burgeoning tourist industry. So know that I hope I have convinced you of the importance of John Knox as a late Georgian, early Victorian British painter. It's time to turn to the subject of today's talk, Glasgow Green, which is dated from the middle of his career when he was in his late 30s. So at his peak, I suppose one could say. So what is the significance of Glasgow Green? Well, it belongs to a series of a dozen views of Glasgow, which were produced in between 1810 and 1828. Today, these works are admired for their meticulous detail, sensitive use of light, and a sense of immediacy that brings a bustling cityscape to life. Knox's inclusion of fine figures, as they were talked about at the time, in his landscapes, and those are the elegantly dressed men and women and children that you can see on your screen, was particularly praised in his time and made these paintings highly popular. Knox's Glasgow Green is particularly exciting Glasgow family for over a century, making its reappearance on the market something of a rediscovery, one could say. Its history between its creation and its acquisition by its most recent owner's grandfather in the 1920s remain unclear, and it's an area ripe for further research. I'd like to take a moment to thank the painting's most recent owner, whose generosity and patience have made the acquisition of this painting by the Hunterian possible. Over the course of a year and a half, he graciously allowed us time to gather the necessary funds and even agreed to a reduced price, believing that this masterpiece belongs in a public collection where it can be enjoyed by the people of Glasgow and further afield. As we've already seen, Knox's love for Glasgow wasn't confined to the Green, but it's clear that this landmark held a special place in his heart. He produced more views of Glasgow Green than any other city site. And it's easy to see why in some ways. Just half a mile from the bustling merchant heart of Glasgow, the Green offered a temporary escape from city life, a place where people could breathe, unwind, and enjoy a moment of nature. Knox's ability to capture this balance between the industrious energy of Glasgow and the serenity of its green makes his work timeless. And on your screen, I've gathered the images I'm aware of Glasgow Green that Knox has painted. So we've got his depiction of the Nelson Monument struck by lightning here, which he declined in 3 versions at least. One of them is in the Hunterian, the one on your screen. There's one in the National Trust for Scotland and one in Glasgow Life. And it might be no coincidence that he depicted that picture of the Nelson Monument 3 times. If we consider that Glasgow was the very first city to commission a city to commemorate the British heroes, so it says something about Glasgow, or how Glasgow wants to portray itself. And then above, we have that view of Glasgow Fair that we've already seen. And then next to it, to your right on the top, we have Regatta on Glasgow's Green, which is in a private collection and is the first representation of a regatta on the Clydes that I'm aware of. It's really rather early. From contemporary newspapers, we know that regattas became quite a thing in the 1840s and 50s, but obviously, considering these paintings, they were already a thing in the 1820s too. And then when we go down in the middle of the screen at the bottom is a view of Glasgow Green, which is now in Glasgow Museum, and then the view of Glasgow Green, which is now in the Hunterian. They're among the earliest visual records of an area that had for some time been a source of local pride. And I quote here from Leighton, who wrote a book on Glasgow advocating its merits in 1828, where he talks about it being at once the boast and the pride of the city. Together, all those paintings provide different perspectives on several prominent landmarks celebrating the country or city's rich history, from medieval Glasgow Cathedral to modern Glasgow, who, I've already said it, who was the first British city to pull funds towards the Nelson Monument. And it also celebrates the city's rapidly changing outline. But they capture more than the city's physical transformation. By documenting its rich social life, its leisure activities on offers, from promenades and regattas to fairs and public spectacles. And they celebrate Glasgow's identity as a modern, flourishing city, inviting comparisons with Europe's great urban centres. As John Bonehill notes in the Old Ways, New Roads publication, Glasgow Green was undergoing significant improvement during Knox time. The marshy riverbank was reshaped into a manicured civic space under the guidance of James Cleland, a local official and statistician. This transformation included large-scale landscaping and architectural projects that connected the progress of the city with the expansion of the River Clyde. They were part of a larger scheme aimed at facilitating the arrival of sheep right into the heart of the city. Among Knox's many works depicting Glasgow Green, and I think I mentioned it was the city's oldest park, the painting now in the Hunterian stands out in a way because I think it captures a pivotal moment in the park's history. And that becomes clear when you compare it to other of those views of the Glasgow Green. And I'm using the one in the Hunterian. That was one of the reasons we were keen to acquire Glasgow Green. We thought that it made such an interesting comparison with the one that was already in our collection, because together the paintings highlight Knox's role as a chronicler of Glasgow's evolution and the impact of those major civic improvements that I've mentioned in reshaping the city during that time. The paintings are separated by less than a decade, and they offer clues as to the implications of the park transformation. For the earlier painting, which is to the left of your screen, the ground appears more rugged, and there's little attention paid to the Clyde. And by contrast, the painting on your right, Glasgow Green, paints a vibrant scene of urban leisure and community life. Gravel walks crisscross the park. You can see them all along, and it's difficult to see on your screen, but if you come and see the painting in the flesh, so to speak, you'll be able to see that those paths just extend in the background. And they are populated by strolling women and children, seated mothers cradling babies, and playful dogs. And their activity is still familiar to today's visitors. In the middle distance, you can see that there are washerwomen that are spreading their linen to dry on the grass. And interestingly, that's an activity that is found in many contemporary descriptions of Glasgow in travel books. So something that was of note. And then the other detail worth noting in the middle ground is the presence of cows grazing peacefully. And they were the ones who would supply fresh milk to the citizens of Glasgow. So both activities, the washing of linen and the grazing cows, hint at the practical role the park played in Glasgow life. And then the painting's detailed outline of the city in the background, as seen from the east, capture the city's larger narrative as well. So again, I mean, we've got the Nelson monument that stands there, and then along here we can see some of those civic buildings, and then we've got St Andrew's Cathedral. We've got some of those cairns that are symbolizing the industrial development of Glasgow. And it's quite an interesting one for the university because the old college was on the east end of Glasgow, and it is because of the development of the industries that it had to move to the west end in the late 19th century. So all those prominent buildings, they reflect Glasgow's evolving social fabric, as well as the development of the industry. And together they provide a very rich architectural context. And I'm still working on identifying all of the buildings there and tagging them so that soon we will be able to share on our online catalog an image of the painting that will just annotate all the different buildings there. So we have a thorough understanding of what Knox was doing with his depiction. So in some ways, one could say that at its core, more so than the Nelson monument hit by lightning, with its romantic and theatrical undertone, Glasgow Green celebrates the green as a vibrant social hub, a place where city life and leisure intertwine. And it captures Glasgow's transformation into a prosperous modern city that balances its historical heritage with modern progress. It reflects the rise of urban leisure and civic pride, portraying the city as a place where architecture, industry, and community thrived in harmony. Knox's works invite us to appreciate Glasgow's vibrant past and the legacy it has left for future generations. And it's interesting to see as well that of all the views of Glasgow Green that we know Knox has executed, this particular view seems to be the one that is most closely connected to engravings after John Knox that were published in the 1820s and 30s to represent Glasgow in publications. And included a drawing as well, which is in the National Gallery of Scotland, that shows that particular view of the Clyde that the painting in the Hunterian focuses on, as well as this engraving, just to show Knox's obvious interest in that particular spot. And the fact that the engraving was published shows how the painting and the engraving brought Knox's vision of the city to a broader audience through those publications, which ensured that Glasgow's story reached a public further afield as well as locally. And also, one of the last points I wanted to make around the painting from that perspective is how Knox's views of cities reflect the broader interest of the time in urban views, because these often served not only as visual records, but also as tools to explore political or moral narratives, as cities were increasingly recognized as key drivers of historical change. So how does the painting fit the Hunterian's collecting policy? Well, Scottish art has long been a cornerstone of the Hunterian art collections. And since I've joined the Hunterian, it has been a priority in its acquisitions policy to strengthen our holdings in this area, especially in the late 18th and early 19th century. And over the past 15 years, we've fund and the National Fund for Acquisition to support this effort. And I should stress here that without this support, we simply could not sustain it with our own funds alone. Before the arrival of Glasgow's Green, the Hunterian held only two works by John Knox, and we've already seen them quite extensively, so I won't expand on them. But the Nelson Monument struck by lightning was gifted to the Hunterian by Ronald K. Johnstone in 1986, and then we know the history of the other two. And the two paintings that were in the Hunterian until Glasgow Green arrived are really interesting, but they both really focus Knox's early to mid career, and they're about dramatic lighting and theatrical composition. And these qualities are what cemented his reputation as a leading landscape painter. But Glasgow Green, which dates from a little later, belongs to the next phase of his career, and is characterized by this ongoing exploration of Scotland's West Coast renowned location, allied with this interest in contemporary Glasgow, where it becomes sharper, cleaner, not cleaner, it's not the right word, but sharper. And they also tend to become larger and more ambitious works. And this is certainly true of Glasgow Green in comparison to the other two works now in the Hunterian. And I think the Glasgow Green painting is likely to have been executed with a view to be sent to exhibitions. So its acquisition not only enhances our collection, but also contributes to the legacy of projects like Old Ways New Road, which explores the relationship between art and Scotland's developing infrastructure. And how does it enhance our collections? Well, it really strengthens the Hunterian's collection of works that capture Glasgow's transformation during the late 18th and early 19th century. And it complements pieces like engraved views of Glasgow by the Falls Academy student. And I've given you just one example in the bottom left corner of your screen, a view of Glasgow from the southeast. So they're among the very earliest views of Glasgow that we know of. And so it's quite interesting to have Knox's vision of Glasgow. It really seems to have moved on tremendously in between the late 18th century and the early 19th century. I've also included a view by Alexander Naismith, who was a contemporary of John Knox, of the Broomielaw. So all those masts of ships that you could see in the distance in the Glasgow Green view, well, here is a zoomed in view on at the Broomielaw of all those sheep at Quay, hinting at Glasgow's high with trade. And then we've got John Clarke's panoramic view of Glasgow from the south in the bottom right corner of your screen, which is typical of the sort of views that became rather fashionable and started popping out following the success of John Knox panoramas of Glasgow. So they were all kind of piggy banking from Knox's success with those views of the city. And those are just a few from what is becoming quite an important group of works in the Hunterian that help us to put Glasgow Green in context and to add to the selection as well. And they really help to understand how views of Glasgow reflected and shaped the city's evolving identity. I'm not talking about the artistic merit of the work because I don't think I need to, but that's also one of the reasons why it was relevant to the collection. So how will the painting be used? Well, Glasgow Green has great potential for interdisciplinary research and teaching. It supports the ongoing work of colleagues in the History of Art department and the School of Critical Studies, some of whom have a strong interest in John Knox and or in representations of Glasgow in the Georgian era. And I have to say colleagues were wonderful because they wrote arguments as to why the painting would be a great addition to the collection that I was able to add to the application forms to the Art Fund and the National Fund for Acquisition. That I think really strengthened the case that the Hunterian was making. And together with a growing group of representations of the city throughout the ages, now part of the Hunterian collections, this painting ties into research around the development of the city's image as a centre for culture, industry and commerce on the one hand, and as a gateway to Scotland's wild and majestic landscapes on the other hand. It also invites comparisons with today's Glasgow, that still promotes itself as a city of culture with a rich industrial and commercial past. And in fact, the painter will feature prominently in the Hunterian's plans to mark Glasgow's 850th anniversary that will take place next year. So I hope you will all come in the Hunterian Art Gallery to see the painting for yourself from February, and also all the works that are relevant to this important anniversary for Glasgow next year. In the longer term, the painting will become part of the Hunterian recently reframed art gallery displays to interrogate historical bases in art history and to encourage dialogue on topics of urban improvement, for example. Where did the funding for Glasgow civic improvements come from? A question that has been asked and is still needing work on. Empire and exploitation is another one. What role did the transatlantic trade and the city's links to enslavement play in its transformation into the second city of the empire as it became known? And also civic pride and cultural ambition. How did Knox's works help shape and disseminate Glasgow's image as a global cultural and economical force? Those are just some of the questions that could be addressed besides the traditional art historical questions that will also be considered. I would like to bring this introduction to Knox's wonderful depiction of Glasgow Green to an end with a summary of the reasons as to why do Knox's depictions of Glasgow still matter. Well, it's rare to see works like Glasgow Green come onto the market, but scarcity alone isn't the reason these paintings are important. Knox's work is not just a beautifully executed landscape, it's a historical document celebrating the city's success while showcasing its identity. His depictions reveal the rapid transformation of Glasgow as it emerged as that well-known second city of the empire. By catering to his contemporaries' fascination with local landmarks along the Clyde, Knox captured the city's vibrancy and ambition. Yet, despite his importance, Knox has remained underappreciated. The last solo exhibition dedicated to his achievement was over 50 years ago, and his catalogue is long out of print. It's time to revisit Knox's role in shaping Glasgow's identity, to investigate how his art reflects the ambition of the city's leaders, presenting Glasgow as a beacon of progress. And here it seems relevant to stress how the University of Glasgow played an important role in supporting the city's rise as second city of the empire, how its members were key in the decision-making and discussions that were taking place regarding the development of the city as Knox was making it one of his main subjects. It also invites difficult but necessary conversations about the city's links to empire, enslavement, and exploitation, critical in understanding the foundation of its meteoric rise. Through exhibitions, publications, and engravings, Knox's vision of Glasgow reached a global audience, reinforcing the city's cultural and economic significance. As we continue to rediscover his legacy, it's clear that Knox was more than just a landscape artist. He was a vital figure in Scotland's cultural and historical narrative. And that's me. Thank you very much for your time. And if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer them.
Thank you, Anne. That was a very comprehensive introduction to Knox and this painting. Thank you so much. It will be great to have it on the wall in the gallery early next year. There's Kevin Doyle put a question in the chat that is about the nature of the paintings. Sometimes paintings of landscapes or cities are somewhat fanciful in their placement of features and landmarks. Is Knox's work true to life?
So sorry, I just got distracted. This is a problem with being on Zoom. I've got a screen full of names and things have popped up and I've been distracted. So can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
So is the depiction of Glasgow in the painting, is that realistic? So are the features where they are placed, is that geographically correct?
We think so, mostly. In fact, we've had quite a few conversations around that, just trying to work out what building is what. And there will be a little bit of artistic license, I think. But overall, the whole point of Knox's work was to be accurate. He's not a topographical artist as such, but he definitely intended to represent what was in front of his eyes. So I would say that there may be some small variations and he may have tweaked some elements of the composition to make it work better. He may have moved a tree here. He may have slightly amended the verge of the river there. But I think he wanted the monuments to be recognizable. That's the whole point of the painting in many ways, I think.
Yep. I think we spent some time recently in front of the painting trying to identify which tower was what building exactly and if that was correct. A bit more to do there, but I would agree. Elsa Boyd asks, what do you know about the painting's early exhibition history in relation to advertising Glasgow civil pride elsewhere, etc., since Knox was about to move to London?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So this is work in progress. The problem with, as often for paintings exhibited in the late 18th, well, in this case, in the early 19th century, is that you can't really rely on the titles to be sure that the painting is the one. So when there are several versions of a painting on Glasgow Green, it might have been called Glasgow Green, it might have been called something else like View of Glasgow, and we don't have photographs to make them connect. So there's a bit of guesswork, but Knox did exhibit several views of Glasgow in the 20s and 30s, both in Glasgow, in other cities in Britain and in London. And there is work in progress to be done there to try and see if we can trace the history of that painting in that way. I think it's going to be tricky. It's the same thing with knowing where it has been until it reached the collection where it was from the 1920s onwards. Again, because it's a view of Glasgow, Glasgow Green, there are plenty of them advertised or listed, but we have no way of knowing for sure which one is the one that's being shown.
Yes. Joseph, your colleague Joseph, he writes, I'm strongly reminded of depictions of Liverpool by Samuel Austin and other artists published in 1831 in the volume Lancashire Illustrated. They show the same concern with industry, architecture, and polite society in a booming early 19th century port city.
Absolutely. And what I find very interesting as well is how you find the same concerns in travel accounts, whether they're travel accounts by private persons who have diaries and will put their impressions down, or whether they're travel accounts that are meant as guides for visitors. And it's this emphasis really. And I think this there's probably been work that's been done on that already, but the way that urban views were evolving at that time in the 1820s and 30s and 40s, particularly in Britain, is very telling of what the country was going through, I think. And when I think of views in France of cities, they pick on the same emphasis, but a little later. It seems to relate quite logically to the state of industrialization and the development of the country where it is. So, yeah, they really reflect the society of their time. Surprise, surprise.
It's what they do. It is almost 1:45. If there's no more questions, I would just like to close by thanking Anne very much for your talk. As I said, it's the last talk, Friday Focus talk of the year, and we will resume already on the 10th of January. So keep an eye out for future talks that will be about a wide ranging of subjects, but all relevant to the Hunterian. So thank you, everybody. Have a great Christmas and hopefully a peaceful Christmas break. Thank you.